here on RealAgriculture.com for the beef market update with Ann Dunford from the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Welcome today, Ann.
Hi there.
Okay, Ann, we talked 2 weeks ago. It seemed like that was the low point in the market. We were a bit glum. We seem like we've sort of gone upwards from where we talked 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, all markets need to make a bottom, and you really don't know exactly when it's going to happen. Of course, this one took longer than we thought, but I do think when we talked 2 weeks ago, we did see our local markets put in our low, and the U.S. markets were the week prior to that. So looks like both markets are going to start to work higher. We've already picked up the last couple of weeks here in Alberta, and same in Texas. They traded up to 86 cents last week on their cash market in Texas, and of course we got up into the low 80s up here. So finally getting out of those nasty 70 numbers. Cattle still aren't quite at break even yet, but most certainly heading the right direction, and sure feeling like we've got some more coming in the market here in the next few weeks.
So what kind of outlook could we have between now and Christmas time?
Well, we've got a period, of course, we've talked for a long time about these tighter supplies in November. Well, guess what? Next week is November. The problem is we talked about them so much and so long that we did pull, we held cattle basically into this time frame longer than we should have. But I do think we're going to see tighter supplies. It's not a big window, though. I do think both U.S. and Canada have placed some heavier cattle against that December, January, February market. We all went to grass with heavier cattle. They did well this summer. They came off heavier, and so of course we go on feed heavier, and that means we're probably looking at a pretty bunched up supply. Now the W word, winter, of course, in the U.S. can often have big impacts, and so we'll be watching that closely. It can shuffle numbers around quite a bit depending on how severe weather is in feedlot country. So that's something to watch for as we go forward. So look for some rally, but I don't know if greed would be a word I'd want to use here in the short run. I'm more optimistic as we get into spring 2010 that we're going to finally see these markets move to the other end of the scale from where we've been here the last few weeks.
So you're saying producers should be a little bit cautious in terms of we've sort of had a bit of a bounce here to maybe be a little bit cautious in regards to let her run?
Yeah, I think we've seen, of course, if you want to call an $80 or an $82 U.S. bottom, we're at 86 now. Is 90 the target? Do you go all that way, or is 88 kind of the number kind of thing? So we've seen some recovery. Here in Canada, of course, here in the last few days, we've seen the dollar come off considerably. And again, lots of people are saying, well, the banks all the analysts, all the experts are saying par for the dollar, and now that we've seen it settle off a bit. Is this a settle off on the way up, or is there something else going on here too? So the fact that the Canadian dollar is a bit weaker than when we talked 2 weeks ago is a very big point, both on fat cattle and feeder cattle, holding markets together better than we thought.
So from a capacity standpoint in the US and Canada, where are feedlot capacities?
Well, we've just come through August and September, our lowest inventories, so we're building. October and November are the two biggest placement months of the year, so you're going to see a lot of cattle go on feed over the past 30 and the next 30 days, and that's when we basically get to our peak on feed supplies. So looking for numbers to be, of course, yearly numbers were big that went on feed in southern Alberta. We didn't export anything really, and it looks like the same kind of pattern on the calf crop. Now the calf crop here in the province of Alberta, we'll be watching it closely. Of course, we know our cow numbers were down pretty close to 20% this summer versus the peak back in 2005, and we're going to feel that in the feeder market in volumes. There's just no two ways about it. Saskatchewan, kind of interesting to watch the volumes in Saskatchewan. Of course, their numbers aren't back below where they were before BSE started, and they have got some big feeder runs happening. So interesting to see a little bit of a different interaction between Alberta and Saskatchewan numbers today.
We had talked earlier off camera that this next 2 weeks is usually the biggest volume weeks, and
absolutely.
What are we seeing?
Well, again, going back to the Alberta-Saskatchewan kind of comparison, the last week October, first week of November, typically, historically, your biggest week for a calf run. And this week the run's a little bit quieter so far in Alberta, but big numbers coming out of Saskatchewan. So we'll see how the dust settles. Did things get shifted around a bit? How much did that drought in east central Alberta, impact things earlier this year? And did some cattle move earlier, get shuffled around to other provinces earlier? So when the dust all settles at the end of the run, we'll know. But right now you're kind of looking, and there are some different things going on. Big runs in Saskatchewan, I guess, would be the biggest news.
So would you say that the bulk of the feed yards you're talking to, are they more concerned about feed grains, the dollar, or the actual fat cattle price?
Well, the fat cattle price in Alberta is completely tied to the dollar. So I think if I was to pick one, it's the Canadian dollar. And again, it's volatility and the lack of a solid direction for a long period of time has got to be one of the most frustrating points. I think the feed grain situation is what it is, but the Canadian dollar is one of our biggest unknowns as we go forward.
Yeah. So it seems like since talking 2 weeks ago, we're definitely feeling a little bit more bullish as a group, but still being conservative is still in play.
Yeah, and again, we've talked a lot about demand and recession. We still want to follow that closely as we go into this U.S. Thanksgiving a month from now. And that often is a fairly good time for beef demand, even though I think we eat more turkeys in Canada than they do us. I don't know, but we tend to get some better demand period towards the end of the year in the U.S. for beef, and so we'll sure be looking for some follow through there. That would be very good news for the industry.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Ann.
Okay.
If you have any more information on Ann Dunford or Gateway Livestock Exchange, go to gatewaylivestockexchange.com.